Story 1, my friend's boss bought an Audi A4 convertible, back when they were new and interesting. One of the talking points was the pop-up roll hoops that were hidden, unless you rolled it. A few months after buying it, he got to test those roll hoops out, as he lost control and skidded down a steep bank about 10 m, tilde 35 ft, deep. The roll hoops did their job, and he survived with just cuts and scratches from the bushes he'd plowed through. The car ended up the right way up, and he got out, walked back up the bank to the side of the road, then got on the phone to the police to report the accident. While he was standing there, a driver from a car that had seen the accident came over to speak to him. Approaching from behind, the other driver asked if he was okay. My friend's boss turned around to reply and dropped dead. His neck had been fractured, but was in one piece right up until he turned his head, when it severed his spinal cord. Story 2, various torture murders are probably the most horrific things I've read about. Junko Furuta, who was a perfectly normal girl until she was kidnapped off the street by a gang for no reason, purely wrong place, wrong time, according to Japanese sources, and unimaginably raped and tortured to death over 44 days. Kiki Camarena, a DEA agent in Mexico who was kidnapped by the Guadalajara cartel and tortured to death over about 3 days. His story is the central focus of the show Narcos, Mexico, but from what I've read, his death was even more brutal than what they make it out to be. A detail consistent in both is that they brought in a doctor to revive him numerous times when he got too close to death, and keep him conscious so he couldn't pass out from the pain. Kelly Ann Bates, who was groomed from a young age by a scumbag who eventually killed her slowly over the course of about a month in their apartment. Her injuries were so horrific the jury at the guy's trial had to get counseling. For example, her eyes were missing, and there were stab wounds in the sockets. Sylvia Likens, whose parents left her in the care of a woman who both personally and with the help of her children and their friends degraded, tortured, and killed over several months. The Hello Kitty murder in China, where a man and his about 13-year-old girlfriend kidnapped a prostitute who had supposedly stolen from him, even though sources say she had paid him back with interest, tortured her to death, and then stuffed her corpse into a Hello Kitty toy. Baby Brianna, a newborn whose mother, father, and uncle tortured and raped her from the second they brought her home from the hospital until the second she died. Baby P, a British toddler whose mother let her boyfriend torture him to death. His back was broken in his last days of life. Honestly, there are just so many horrifically on par with each other. You could list them all day. Story 3, before my dad died, he once told me a story from when he was in Vietnam in the 1960s. He told me about a mission where he and one other American with 5 SIG strikers, South Vietnamese villagers turned fighters, were tasked to emplace seismic ground sensors along a trail network deep in the jungle. He said they were about 2 days into the mission when he and 2 of the strikers split off from the main group to go watch a nearby trail intersection. He said the jungle was pretty quiet that day, just the sounds of birds and bugs and an occasional monkey. He said they had been watching the trail intersection for about 3 or 4 hours and were deciding on whether to move further down the trail or to turn back and link up with the rest of the patrol. Before leaving the cover of the brush, my dad said he checked the trail ahead of them one last time and prepared his men to move. Now here is where the story gets interesting, and he told this part with absolute dead seriousness. He said just as he started to step out onto the trail, he sees a light-skinned black Union cavalry soldier in full battle gear laying alongside the trail, just shy of the intersection. My dad said the Union soldier had 2 pistols, a Spencer rifle, and a short, curved club at his hip. As my dad was trying to process what he was seeing, the soldier looked directly at him and smiled. Then the soldier slowly placed a finger up to his lips, as if to tell him to be silent, and then motioned my dad back off the trail. My dad said he signaled for his men to remain hidden, and he recalled that as he slipped back into the jungle on one side of the trail, the Union soldier did the same on his side of the trail. Less than 10 seconds later, he said the lead element of a group of NVA, North Vietnamese Army soldiers, walked right through the trail intersection some 30 feet away. My dad estimated that the group was comprised of some 70-80 soldiers equipped with automatic rifles, light machine guns, and rocket-propelled grenade launchers. He has no doubt that his entire team would have been wiped out on the spot. He said as soon as the enemy soldiers had passed, he and his team beat feet out of there as fast and as quietly as they could and rejoined with the rest of the patrol. He reported the enemy soldiers his team had encountered, but decided not to say anything about the soldier he had seen. My dad kept this secret for many, many years, only telling me just before he passed, and earlier only telling his grandmother on her deathbed in the 1970s. He said when he told his grandmother, she smiled, and without opening her eyes told him you saw old Red Tom. Red Tom was my great-great-grandfather. He was a half-black/half-Creek free man who was a scout for the Union Army during the Civil War, and later served with the U.S. Cavalry in the American West. He was known for carrying 2 pistols, a Spencer rifle, and a Creek War Club into battle. Story 4, 100% true as it happened to me. It's probably more spooky than scary. I'll let you be the judge. Many years ago, before there were cell phones, we had these things called pagers strapped to our hips. Someone would page you with their phone number, and you would call them back when you got to a phone. As an on-call technician, working in the audio-visual field, my pager would go off all the freaking time. Like most people who used pagers, our clients knew that if you followed up your number with a 911, that would indicate to the technician to stop what they were doing and call right away. Although I was always busy, I rarely, if ever, got 911. One afternoon traveling from Orlando to St. Petersburg via Interstate 4, my pager goes off with a number I don't recognize, followed by the 911. I find the first exit and pull into a little truck stop-looking place outside of Plant City to use the pay phone. This takes maybe 3 minutes tops. I walk in, ask for some change, and head to the wall where there are 4 pay phones to choose from. I pop my quarter in and dial the number displayed on my trusty pager. It rings and rings and rings and rings. I'm thinking to myself, WTF? Who would page me with a 911 and not answer their phone? It's just about then that I notice another ringing sound, in addition to the one in my ear. I pull the handset from my ear, and 2 phones over on the wall, another pay phone is ringing, but with an incoming call. I hang up the handset, and the ringing stops on the other phone. I walk a few paces over, pick up the handset, and look at the phone number printed above the buttons. I look at the number on my pager, I look at the number on the phone. I look at the number on my pager again. I look at the phone again. Except for the 911, they are identical. I kinda lose my breath for a second, and then I make my way over to the girl at the counter and ask if she saw anyone use the pay phone. She said I was the only person in the store in the last hour. The whole episode probably took 15 minutes, but man, I was freaked out. The hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up, and I just wanted out of there. I get about 10 miles down the highway and come upon a scene that looked like a bomb went off. 4-car pile-up involving a tractor-trailer hauling a load of steel that had come loose. State troopers and paramedics just arriving. I pulled over to the side and helped the best I could, but it was all pretty much over once it began. I have no idea why I got that page or from whom or what, but I'm convinced that if I hadn't, I would not be alive to write this today. Story 5, I used to run the boilers in a DOE building. Apparently at some point in the 80s, 3 people were murdered over involvement in a big VCR theft. VCRS meant for the school system had apparently been stolen out of this warehouse. It was an inside job. Something went wrong. The head custodian was found shot to death, and later the bodies of the other 2 were reported buried in Monticello, but word is they had first been incinerated. In the boilers, I was in charge of operating and maintaining. There were 3 operational boilers, and one that wasn't in service, no clue which one was supposedly used. But when you're firing them up, you're typically the only person in the building. Not a single day went by that I fired them up and didn't wonder which one was used. But that wasn't what gave me the real heebie-jeebies. You have to clean the interior of these boilers really well. Otherwise, the fire won't transfer heat to the water very efficiently, especially with #6 oil. These boilers would build up a lot of soot. You have to suit up in a Tyvek suit, wear a mask, and climb right into the firebox, I found myself staring down the business end of that burner many times, wondering what that panic would feel like. I'm reasonably sure these people were dead before getting put in the boiler, though. Once, I was actually in one boiler, while another one was running the valve that isolated my boiler from the main steam line wasn't holding. And by the time I realized how warm it was getting, it was enough to panic trying to lift myself up and belly crawl through the small opening. The metal was almost too hot to keep my hands on for long. Definitely creepy experience, considering the history of that boiler room. Story 6 years ago, when I was 8, my family lived in this big weird house, kind of on the edge of a small town. The school district was in the middle of a big restructuring, so even though we were only a couple grades apart, my brother and I went to different schools and took different buses. This left me as the last person to leave in the morning and the first person to get home in the afternoon, which meant it was my job to make sure all the lights were off and the door was locked. One morning I noticed the basement door was open and the light was on, so before I left, I turned off the light and closed the door. When I got home that afternoon, the light was on and the door was open again. I just assumed that I'd forgotten to actually take care of it when I noticed it in the morning, so I went over to turn off the light and close the door. When I got to the top of the basement stairs, I looked, and there was a big shadowy male figure towards the bottom of the staircase. I freaked out, slammed the door and pushed a bunch of boxes against it, and then went and hid in my closet. For months I didn't tell my family because I was positive what I had seen was a ghost and didn't think anyone would believe me. Then about a year after that incident, my mom and her boyfriend realized that small amounts of money had been going missing for months, totaling around $800, $900, but never more than $60 at once. So we all walked around the house with flashlights trying to figure out how they could have gotten in. Turns out some creep was climbing in through a small hole in the outside of the house, shimmying through a crawl space, then coming up into the house through the basement. Realizing I had been alone in the house with him on at least one occasion was one of the worst, most terrifying moments I've ever had. Edit, whoa, this blew up way more than I expected. I'm doing my best to respond to comments/questions. Sorry if I end up missing yours. Story 7. Told this here before, but once more my friend had this neighbor who was a retired mechanic. They lived on some properties with large front lawns and long driveways. His neighbor had a couple derelict cars parked up near his garage that he took parts from occasionally. This neighbor of his started hearing noises while sitting in his living room, coming from his front yard. Every time he'd go to the window, there would be nothing there. He assumed it was a raccoon or a coyote or whatever. He kept hearing the noise, so he'd go outside to look around, but would find nothing. He'd put out traps and occasionally catch something, yet the noise persisted. Soon, he started claiming that he was hearing voices coming from the front yard, like whispering. He'd go outside and look around the perimeter of his property, but would find nothing. It was persistent, so he'd started calling the cops. Every time the cops came and looked around and would find nothing. So they told him he needed to stop calling them for this, and perhaps get a security camera or whatever. So this guy thought he was losing his mind. One summer evening he couldn't sleep, so he went to the back patio to smoke a cigarette. Suddenly, he heard voices coming from the front of his house. He put his cig out and snuck around to the front, and got there just in time to see the doors to his derelict conversion van silently shut. He ran back to the backyard and went inside his home and called the police to tell them what he had seen. The police arrived and approached cold, i.e. without lights/sirens, and when they approached the van, the doors swung open and a bunch of people ran out in every direction. Upon searching the van, the cops found syringes and paraphernalia and determined that people were shooting up in there. Story 8. I once heard a property was abandoned, and it was all over school that it was haunted. My friends and I decided to drive up to take a look at it one night. It sat on a few dozen acres. There was no fence and no signs prohibiting access, and all we had to do was take a dirt road for a mile to get to a hill that overlooked the whole property. Turns out it was abandoned but still owned, and had a caretaker. The caretaker literally drove a truck with the lights off right up to us, and then turned them on and tried to ram us. We were able to avoid him, but he then followed us at 60 miles an hour off his property back onto the road, then into and past a residential neighborhood, trying to ram us off the road the whole way. My car and his truck narrowly avoided hitting houses, parked cars, and narrowly missed driving straight into a church before he stopped and turned around. I know I was on his property, but there were no signs and no barriers, and we were just on the edge of it. That he chased us way past his property and tried to kill us multiple times, and probably felt justified because we were trespassing, still gives me the chills. People are capable of anything if they feel justified in their violence. Story 9, I'll tell you one that happened to me, or rather, I was witness to. One night, I was out at a bar with a friend I was visiting in New Rochelle, NY. We went outside for a cigarette, and a car came flying past the bar. The car burned through a red light and started going up this hill that was on a curve. We watched as he veered over the double yellow and smashed head-on with another car coming from the other direction. Both cars' hind ends lifted up, then slammed down. The car that was driving correctly burst into flames. I ran inside and grabbed the fire extinguisher, then yelled to the bartender to call 911 and say there has been an accident. My friend, a few other patrons, and me ran to the cars. Now, I used to think this was a fictional trope, but I was pretty drunk before this happened, and I swear it sobered me up instantly. I tried spraying the fire, but it did nothing. The fumes and heat were awful, and all we could do was stand back. The worst part was, and this will haunt me forever, was that the woman in the burning car was screaming as she died. My God, it was the worst sound ever. The fire department came and put the fire out. The police took us back to the bar and took statements. I found out the next day in the news that the car that was not speeding was being driven by a young woman coming home late from work. She was a block away from home, and I think she was either newly married or a new mother. The rotten motherfucker driving the other car was some rich drunk cocksucker. He lost a leg, but otherwise was physically unharmed. I have no clue if he did time, as I left to go back home a day or so later. I'm trying to find a link for the news story, but I can't, as this was maybe 6 or 7 years back. I remember it being reported on Low HUD and Channel 12 News. Story 10, all right. So my preschool teacher, who also ended up somehow changing jobs and becoming my 11th grade English teacher, had a super interesting life. Her mother had some super famous book. Her father worked high up in the government, but enough about her family. First, let me describe her to you. She had dark hair and blue eyes. You'll see why this matters in a minute. She told this story every single year to the new students in her class. When she was younger, she was driving through Arizona on a two-way road while her boyfriend at the time was following behind her on his motorcycle. For those who don't live in Arizona, certain stretches of it can be quite isolated and deserted. She said that they were on a long drive. It's been about 6 years since I was in her class, so details are fuzzy. But basically, her and her boyfriend both knew the destination where they were heading by memory and eventually got separated by a few miles. A man who was behind her in a Volkswagen Beetle kept pulling up beside her into the other lane. No one was coming, and motioning at her to pull over. She somewhat ignored him the first few times, but he kept doing it and began getting more frantic each time. She said that she believed that he spotted something wrong with her car, so she saw a parking lot off the road for a deserted gas station and pulled over. Once pulled over, she said that she instantly got an eerie feeling. The man was suspicious and kept telling her that he saw something wrong with her headlight and insisted she get out of the car so he could show her what he meant. Her boyfriend, who was a few miles behind her, eventually caught up and spotted her car at the sketchy gas station. Right as she was out of the car, her boyfriend began to pull in. As he did that, this man got into his car and sped off like his life depended on it. They later were able to identify that the man was Ted Bundy. She said she cannot imagine what would have happened to her if her boyfriend had been even another 3 miles behind her on the road. Edit the spelling/clarity of details.